Good afternoon. My name is Benita Gonzalez. I'm the Director of Support for Students with Exceptionalities for the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston. Today's topic is differentiated instruction, and a strategy of that is the station-based instruction. So let us begin. What does it mean to educate the whole child? This is one discussion that we had in our previous presentation when we discussed the whole child approach. And today, I want to just explore some of the student learning that we talked about last time, which were the 5 areas below. Executive functions, relationship and social care, academic performance and knowledge, self-awareness, spiritual awareness, and spiritual insight. And again, they're not in any certain order, but those are the 5 areas of student learning to complete the whole child. Today, we're going to focus in one area, academic performance and knowledge. We understand all the others are as helpful and also meaningful, but for the sake of today, we're going to discuss with the differentiated instruction topic, the academic performance and knowledge area of the 5 areas of learning. Now, I want to introduce you to 3 experts that I'll be reviewing throughout the presentation. First one is Debbie Diller. Debbie Diller is what I call the queen of station-based instruction. If you haven't seen her latest book, it's Growing Independent Learners from Literacy Standards to Stations K through 3. She has also expanded not only to literacy stations, but also into math, science, and other stations as well. Her whole area is station-based instruction. Again, going off of another person that I'm going to be talking about here in a little bit is Carol Ann Tomlinson's differentiated instruction. The next person, of course, Howard Gardner, his theory of multiple intelligences. Many of you have probably heard of Howard Gardner, and if not, I'm going to discuss today about him and about learning styles and how all that circles back into stations and differentiated instruction. Last but not least is going to be Carol Ann Tomlinson, this is her latest book, The Differentiated Classroom. She is what we call the leader in differentiation. So many of you have probably heard about her. If not, today definitely we'll get a glimpse of a lot of her pieces of work. Let's start with Carol Ann Tomlinson. So Carol Ann Tomlinson is an American educator, an author, and a speaker. She's known as the leader in differentiated instruction. She is a reviewer for 8 journals and has authored over 200 articles, 20 books, and other professional development materials. Her books on differentiation translate into 12 languages. That's how important her differentiated classroom piece books are. Her levels of assessment, student success, all those formative pieces and summative pieces that today many teachers and many educators are using in their classrooms and in their schools. What you see currently on this presentation are her 2 most recent books, The Differentiated Classroom Responding to the Needs of All Learners, that's the 2nd edition, and also Assessment and Student Success in a Differentiated Classroom. Because just like any other type of approach, everything requires assessment and to try and locate and show how differentiation can improve the process in all grade levels and subject areas. So that is Carol Ann Tomlinson. Next one again is Howard Gardner. He's an American developmental psychologist and the professor of cognition and education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education at Harvard University. He is the author of 30 books translated into 32 languages and several hundred articles. Gardner is best known in educational circles for his theory of multiple intelligences. And I'll discuss a little bit more in detail when we get to learning styles portion of our presentation. But if anyone has ever had the honor to visit or be part of his presentations, many of them, of course, are up north, but he has been in Texas many of times, I would highly recommend it. Not least Debbie Diller. She's been an educator since 1976. Her experiences range from being a classroom teacher to a Title I reading specialist to a migrant education teacher to a literacy coach, as well as a national consultant and author. She's the author of many books from Steinhaus publishers, including Math Workstations, Spaces and Places, Making the Most of Small Groups Literacy Workstations, and Practice with Perfect. She has several videos on literacy workstations and small group instruction. Debbie's most recent endeavor is the launch of Growing Independent Learners, an online workshop, and the accompanying book, Growing Independent Learners. Debbie has trained many teachers in schools across North America in all aspects of literacy instruction. She is well known for her presentations on literacy and math workstations and small group instructions. It is important to Debbie to spend time every week working with children and their teachers in classrooms so that she can stay tuned into the needs of today's children and their teachers. Below, you will see some books that she has written. She currently has 6 books out. The latest one, again, is the very first one, which is Growing Independent Learners. She also has videos, they're really wonderful little small workshops for teachers to look at. And also she's coming into Houston, and I'll give you guys a little bit more information on her presentation and workshop that she's bringing to Houston during the summertime. It's a summer institute that she put together. Highly recommend if you're going into any kind of station-based instruction to get a little bit more visual glimpse, to read her books, look at her videos, receive her workshops, just so you can see a little bit more visualization on what that looks like. Tailoring instruction to meet student needs. In our last presentation, I talked about the very last one, which is PRIM, the Pre-Referral Intervention Manual. I do understand that Deborah Cohen and the Jewish Federation provided copies of that book to many of you in your schools, and they have a little over 4,000 strategies for you to utilize for those students that just require a little bit more intervention. That would be the student that is either struggling and you're just trying to find some ways to get to the student, trying to find out other things to do. That way when a teacher says, I have tried everything, really and truly they have tried everything, if in fact they followed many of the PRIM interventions. But today we're going to focus on differentiation, station-based instruction, and Howard Gardner multiple intelligences. They all take a big circle, and it's a big system effect, so I just wanted to point out what are some of the areas that we're going to pinpoint on today. So what is differentiated instruction? Differentiation means tailoring instruction to meet individual needs. Just like that, it's meeting those student needs. It's improving learning outcomes, increasing engagement, inspire a love of learning, increase self-awareness, help students learn more efficiently and with deeper understanding. So that is the key piece on differentiation. It's aiming to all those areas. So that would be you and the teacher in the blue, and you're aiming to support the student and obtain an aim for all of those areas. Why differentiated instruction? Classrooms are filled with students who have different needs, come from different educational backgrounds, have different attention spans and interests, have different language abilities, have different cultural backgrounds. That's many of our schools today. Those kids do not just come one size fits all, everything's great. They all are different and in their own special ways. So today I'm hoping to at least go over some of those areas for you to implement some of those pieces. So here is a differentiation model. Now, within this differentiation model, you see 4 areas in the top. You can differentiate through content, process, product, and learning environment. In all those 4 areas, it's according to the student's readiness, the student's interest, and learning profile. Because of all of this, you're wanting to increase student growth, motivation, efficiency. And how do I do that as a teacher? By using instructional strategies such as graphic organizers, scaffolded reading, cubing, think tic-tac-toe, learning contracts, tiering, learning and interest centers, independent studies, intelligence preferences, and so on. So this in itself is an entire differentiation model. I know to some when you see this, it can probably be overwhelming, but let's just focus on the top piece first, which is content, process, product, and learning environment, and what that is, so teachers can understand what are we in truly different. So let's start first with content. Content is what the student needs to learn or how the student will get access to the information. So here are some examples of differentiating content. It's using reading materials at varying readability levels, putting text materials on tape, using spelling or vocabulary lists at readiness levels of students, presenting ideas through both auditory and visual means. Visual is very powerful lately. Using reading buddies, and meeting with small groups to reteach an idea or skill for struggling learners, or to extend the thinking or skills of advanced learners. That is differentiating content. Now you may say, I'm already doing half this stuff, if not all of this. Now you at least can place an understanding of what you're differentiating. You currently are doing differentiated instruction through content. So at least you are placing now an understanding and a language under what you're doing in your. The next piece after content is process. Processes are the activities in which the student engages in order to make sense of or master the content. Some examples of differentiating process is using tiered activities through which all learners work with the same important understanding and skills, but proceed with different levels of support, challenge, or complexity. The next part is providing interest stations that encourage students to explore subsets of the class topic of particular interest to them. And the next is developing personal agendas, task lists written by the teacher and containing both in-common work for the whole class and work that addresses individual needs of learners, to be completed either during specified agenda time or as students complete other work early. Offering manipulative or hands-on support for students who need them, and varying the length of time a student may take to complete a task in order to provide additional support for a struggling learner or to encourage an advanced learner to pursue a topic in greater depth. That is a lot of words to say about process, but process is the main piece that we're going to focus on today. Because in process, if you see on there the tiered activities and the interest stations, we're discussing the station-based instruction to encourage and explore that area for the students. The personal agendas, you might have some students that require extra time, as you see at the very bottom, varying the length of time a student may take to complete a task. You may have some students that have already been evaluated and are diagnosed, and through their diagnoses or their evaluation, their diagnostic evaluation, they recommend, the diagnostician or the psychologist recommends that he or she have extra or extended time. Now, when you're developing these stations or all these different tasks, take into account these accommodations and what that means for that learner. They may have a different type of timing schedule when you start your stations. So take into account whenever you start planning these and initiating these stations or these interest stations that they're accommodated with that kind of length of time. And you ask yourself, what am I trying to get out of these stations? What is the goal for this student? To complete the station, the transition time, what skill am I trying to make sure they obtain? So these are all some pieces that you're going to learn whenever we get to the station-based piece. So again, this is process. So again, if you're already tiering activities, you're already doing stations per se, and you're already extending and have manipulatives and hands-on support, process is what you're working on and what you're doing and differentiating your classroom. Next piece is product. Culminating projects that ask the student to rehearse, apply, and extend what he or she has learned in a unit. In many cases, as teachers, we want to know, did he or she understand what we are trying to teach them? And you give the student opportunities and options in how to express that required learning. You may ask them to create a puppet show, write a letter, or develop a mural with labels. Again, those are different ways of expressing their learning. Using rubrics that match and extend students' varied skill levels. It may be some type of multi-tiered level assessment or rubric that talks about emerging, proficient, exemplary. Encouraging students to create their own product assignments as long as the assignments contain required elements. In some cases, you may have students that have modifications. Modifications are students that are below grade level and working, let's say you have a 5th grader working on 1st grade reading. That's modifying. So if you're modifying, you may encourage the student to show you in a different way, in a different product, with a different assignment that they are learning or they have learned the express skill or content. So that's what we're talking about when you're encouraging students to show you in a different way. Some students would like to work alone or in small groups. So you as a teacher would have to observe and take that into account. How best does your child or the student learn? And lastly, we have learning environment, the way the classroom works and feels. Make sure there are places in the room to work quietly without distraction, as well as places that invite student collaboration. Providing materials that reflect a variety of cultures and home settings. Setting out clear guidelines for independent work that matches individual needs. Developing routines that allow students to get help from teachers who are busy with other students and cannot help them immediately. Helping students understand that some learners need to move around to learn while others do better sitting quietly. So again, in some of these examples, you have to make sure you have a learning environment that is not only comfortable for the student, but also comfortable for you as well. And these spaces, providing quiet spaces, those without distractions, there's a lot of schools currently looking into what's called break spaces, peace corners, peace gardens. There's all sorts of different names for it. I'll highly recommend for you to look up break spaces in a classroom. Now, break spaces are not places for a child to retrieve and stay there all day. The concept behind break spaces is for a child to re-enter the classroom when he or she is ready, and that's usually between 1 to 3 to 4 minutes. But if you see the child is staying there 5, 10, 15, or 20 minutes, that may be a discussion with the student, maybe if you have a school counselor, or even with the parents on what's going on with the child. Those are great communication tools to utilize to help you understand the child a little bit better. Providing materials that reflected cultures and home settings. There is a school that I currently know that their break space was created by the students. They brought in little things from home to remind them about home settings or make them feel a little bit more comfortable. Some brought in things of their culture. And again, that all comes back to providing a learning environment. Setting out clear guidelines, and you want to make sure that, people call them classroom rules, but there's guidelines too if you're working on your own, or if you're working with a partner, that there's guidelines on how to work productively. Developing routines. It's really important to make sure you have a routine, especially those that are diagnosed that require a routine, especially those on the autism spectrum. Or you may have a child who has a level of OCD of some sort that may need routine. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't have your fire drill, you can't be flexible. That's another teaching ground in your learning environment to make sure to help the children become flexible as well. Helping some students understand that some learners need to move around. Flexible learning spaces. If you haven't looked that up yet, I encourage you to and recommend you that look up flexible learning spaces, where learning environments are a way for students to move around, not only for comfort level as well, but it just becomes that we are in an entirely new type of school system where children nowadays need that kind of space since they're not outdoors as much as used to. It would be a great idea to have some type of space where your children can move around. And what a better place in your classroom itself, instead of having them exit your classroom at all times, trying to go to the restroom just to get out. So again, looking at your learning environment. Now, all this, tying it together, here's the second piece. We already discussed content, process, and product and learning environments, according to now the readiness, interest, and learning profiles of the student. Now, we're not going to talk about readiness today, but we are going to discuss interest and learning profile. So let's start first with interest. Many of you have already done one of these, which is a student interest inventory. Sometimes you design these in the beginning of school to try and get to know your learner. Some of you provide it in the what we call October-November time to see if anything has changed. These are well-designed student interest surveys, provide valuable information from students that teachers use to establish and maintain positive relationships, because that's one of the important pieces of the 5 essential components of a child. Inform instruction in response to their students' individual needs and preferences. It's always good to know what your students' interests are so you can create stations, and we talk a little bit more about stations in a little bit, and this will help you create those stations, their interest level. Intentionally recommend materials to students based on their expressed interest as well. So if there's some kind of reading material, if the child is having difficulty reading but really enjoys, let's say baseball, then you can find books about baseball, and that may express some interest for them to start reading. So student interest greatly influences learning engagement and the student's ability to connect to new ideas. Students are more likely to be engaged if the instruction taps into or connects to their interest. Here beside, on the side of this presentation, I have student interest survey. This is a very simple elementary one. You can do an interest survey all the way up until middle school. So these, and even adults have student interest surveys or adult interest surveys where they can fill out. But be very careful. Don't think that once you receive the student interest surveys, especially for the younger ones, that you're going to really get the truth, because in many cases parents are filling these out. And the parent may say that his or her favorite food is quinoa, when in reality he or she may say, no, that's not my favorite food. So at least it becomes a communication tool between you and the student. So it's not always going to be all truth in the very beginning, but you can add to it as you continue your school year. Now we talked about interest, and now we're going to go into learning profiles. Teaching in the way the child learns. The theory of multiple intelligences. We talked about Howard Gardner and his theory of multiple intelligences. And in this area, it urges a rethinking of how teachers should approach subjects and topics. If children do not learn in any one way, then the teacher truly must teach in the way the child learns. Again, in the way the child learns. Guided by the very diverse intellectual profiles of students in a classroom, teaching must become less of a single approach aimed at all students and more of a crafted effort to engage the multiple intelligence or potentials represented in the room. Crafted is the key word. All these stations and all these key pieces in putting together a classroom lesson or bring together an assessment takes a lot of crafting, a lot of planning, a lot of organizing. So it takes a lot of those executive functioning skills for the teacher to put all this together. Now off to the side is the multiple level intelligences. There's 8. There's musical, rhythmic, logical, mathematical, naturalistic, interpersonal, bodily kinesthetic, spatial, interpersonal, and linguistic. I also I've also attached an attachment of what I passed out at the presentation. This is actually the multiple level intelligences. This is actually a form. It's an observation form to help you look at a student and assess the student on where they are at. What kind of learning styles do they have? And once you complete this entire survey, you will find out what kind of learners you have in your classroom. So let's say, for instance, you have a lot of musical rhythmic learners in your classroom. And with that approach, you can at least know that your stations will probably have some kind of musical rhythmic component to it. Let this guide you. Let this help you implement a lot of these pieces into your stations. Now, this is not just for children with special needs. This is all children. So because you want to make sure the child understands and is guided and is interested. And through learning profiles, that's a wonderful way. Now, just because you've done a learning profile once, let's say in August, doesn't mean you can't redo it in October or November, because children change. Their brains change. Everything about them change. And not only that, but their interest will change. So as you may know, a learning profile later on will give you a little bit more information on what other type of learner the child has grown into. So again, here is the model. We talked about the content, process, product, and learning environment, ways to differentiate, and how we differentiate and create those areas are through readiness, interests, learning profiles, because again, in the end, we want our children to grow, be motivated, and be efficient. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the next piece, which is falling under process. And I circled it here under process so you can see process goes into interest levels, readiness, learning profile, and again towards the bottom. With that, we come into station-based instruction. Stations refer to spots where students work on different tasks simultaneously in the classroom and then rotate through them to learn content skills related to a topic. Students might skip stations if they know the material, or some stations might have tasks designed for advanced students only. This strategy is based on the work of Carolyn Tomlinson. She differentiates between centers and stations. Now, I want you to understand the difference between a center and a station. Centers are areas in the classroom where students refine a skill or extend a concept. Stations are different places in the classroom where students work on tasks simultaneously and whose activities are linked. Those are the two differences between a center and a station. Now here's a visual example of a station-based classroom. As you can see, you'll see the teacher. She's over on the right-hand corner. It looks like there's an online station happening in number 3. There's some type of movement station happening in 4 and 5. Maybe some kind of drama in 4. Looks like the little girl's reading to the other girl while she's acting out some pieces. Another online piece in 2, and looks like a self-directed type of component on 1 and 6, and you have your observers in 6. So I'm not telling you to bring in 6 stations. Again, I'll tell you later about management of station-based instruction. You never want to start with 6 stations all at once. I know as teachers we think big, but really and truly you have to start small to get a grasp of that rotation. And this is a high school classroom on station-based. Each station contains different materials and tasks. So here you have the teacher and the students, another visual example for you. I know these are more desk-oriented. Walls are a little neutral, a little bland, not your typical elementary classroom since this is high school. But there's other ways to look at this as well if you look into flexible learning spaces. So again, there's that word, flexible learning spaces, because again, not many of your high school students really want to sit down. It's good to have them going up and moving. Here's an example of a math station. As you can see, this class is rotating from practice plaza, proof place, the shop, and the teaching station. Here the teacher created names for all of these stations. And again, how you have the students rotate, that's going to depend on where their levels are, whether you want to say, hey, you're the blue group, the green group, the yellow group, or sometimes some teachers get really creative and the groups have names that are created by the students themselves. These are the lemurs, these are the meerkats, these over here are the pandas. So just know that you can get creative with your groups. Here's another example. You have your direct instruction, your reading comprehension, your fluency, your writer's workshop. You have an entire literacy station here that's working simultaneously. And again, this one has 20-minute rotations. Looks like they have a grouping of about 4 per group. And have ways, and again, we'll go through management, have ways for them to either talk to each other, ask each other questions, and make sure during these stations there's always some kind of directives that are not only verbally given and not only that you've role modeled it, but they're also written down so they know to go back and read the directions if they're getting stuck. Because we'll have that child that gets distracted or stuck. So you'll have to come up with a way on how for them to get your attention. Here's another one. You have the small group instruction, small group work, collaborative project, and online learning. And again, these are your simple 4. Here we have another 6 station effect. Now I want you to see how this teacher created these stations. And it looks like she has about 5 students per station, but I like her middle piece. She's asking herself time per station, station objective, materials needed, cue to move to the next station, product expected. So these are all good questions for her to answer prior to beginning these stations. A rotation schedule. Now it doesn't have to be as bland as this. Many teachers again are very creative, but this is just an example for you to see what the different rotations look like. Now I know one of the teachers asked me at the presentation, what if a student needs more time? What if they, finally got him so engaged after 10 to 15 minutes and now it's time to rotate? This is where you create those personal agendas, these personal schedules. So if you know this child requires an hour for guided reading with teacher or an hour with SSR or listening stations or centers, that's where they have their personal rotation. So just know that definitely can be created and given. So you as your teacher will guide yourself on how to take that child through that journey. So I wanted to also look into the station and give you some examples of some activities that you can put in place. Now these are not the only ones that you can put in place, but I at least wanted to give you some activities. First, you have an open-ended activities where all students in the group tackle the same assignment, but the end product will differ from beginner, intermediate, and advanced clusters. It's a great technique because students will feel comfortable writing within their level. Ask your students in a reading group to draw a picture of the main character. Afterwards, instruct them to write speech bubbles around the character describing what they might say. Now here off to the right, you will see a drawing of a man with glasses and a little speech bubble. Depending on the age and developmental age of each child and the level of where the child is, the end product's going to look different. Some students may do a stick man and forget the bubble, or some students may write a sentence underneath, or some students may forget the person and just write a sentence. So those are the different types of products that you'll probably be receiving. Tiered activity is when students are doing the same activity, but it's tiered according to their difficult level. So here's an example. Have your students play a game of memory. This game is easy to differentiate because you can have beginner students try and match a letter with its sound, while more advanced children can try and match a letter to a word. To differentiate this station, assign different bags of cards for each level and direct specific students to the cards they could choose. To make differentiation invisible, color code the bags for the 3 levels. So here again, you have off to the side your memory game. And again, you can always go into color coding your groups. So whenever your stations, whenever you create your station, you can have the blue group does this, yellow group does this, and red group does this. So that can also be an option for you. Learning menus. These are a top choice lately because kids, they love to choose on their own. These are, or choice boards also called, are varied activities that give students options on how they want to learn a concept. They often mimic a tic-tac-toe board where your classroom would pick 3 activities to complete, 1 from each row to form a line. Differentiated instruction menus benefit all students because you can tailor each board to students' readiness, learning style, or interest, and kids think they are a lot of fun. So here's an example. Set up an exciting learning menu for math with items like design math flashcards, measure 5 things in the room, or write math facts in expanded form, and pay attention to how each of your students prefers to learn. And here's an example of a learning menu off to the side. Again, where there's choices, there's always some type of growth. Now, management. Again, when you're a teacher and you're sitting with a group doing some type of reading group activity, and there's students that require your attention, those are some things that you're going to have to manage on. How are they going to get my attention, and when should they get my attention? What does that look like? Or should they wait and write it down, or do you already have everything written down at the station for them to understand, or do they use their buddies in their group to help them out? So a couple of management areas here. A station is a strategy for differentiated instruction. We understand that. Students only need to visit stations that will move them towards proficiency. All students need dedicated time with the teacher. So I'm hoping that these stations that you create are something that's moving them forward. You don't ever want to make sure their stations are something where it's stagnant. You want something where there's growth. Use an anchor activity to manage students who finish early. You will have those early birds, and sometimes we'll just sit there and play around. You want to make sure you have anchor activities that when you're done, and that those are written out as well, when those are done, that they have an activity that they could finish up or work on. Build time at the teaching station for teacher to circulate. You don't ever want to just take your time and create yourself for a station. You want to make sure that you circulate throughout the room in some areas or through some rotation. Teachers spend time modeling. Modeling is super important in this whole area. The expectations that they have for how students should behave and the types of tasks they will encounter at each station. That way the students have seen it visually through modeling, and also they've seen it through rotations on how the expected stations should flow. Teachers should collaborate with their colleagues to develop tasks for review, practice, enrichment, and acceleration. We discussed highly about collaboration. Collaboration doesn't just mean within your grade level. Collaboration means within your school or within other schools, even schools within your schools. So talk to colleagues that either teach the same content as you, or colleagues that for the most part have station instruction. We had some people in the audience today that were part of the Jewish schools that have already started stations and that have already implemented certain curriculums for 4 different students. So I encouraged her to make sure that others come out and look at her classroom and see how that rotation looks like. And lastly, teachers may think big but encouraged to start small. Again, we have so many wonderful ideas. I even have many teachers who come straight out of the university, come in with hundreds of lesson plans, cutesy ideas, rubrics galore. but you want to make sure you think small first. Think big, but encourage to do something really small. Start with small stations, and then, once you have the hang of it and managed it, continue, and then you can increase from there. Now here I have a video. I'm not going to show you the video right now, but I encourage you, I'm going to send the link with Deborah, so you can at least click on it and look at the link. I only think that it'd be best if you watched it on your own instead of me having to re-record it here. But I want you to take a good glimpse of Providence, Rhode Island. It's a school, it's a public school who started station-based instruction. It's a differentiated strategy again, and how it has been working amazingly out there. So hoping that you can watch that. Now again, I talked to you guys about Debbie Diller. Debbie Diller has a Summer Institute coming 2018, July 13th and the 14th in Houston. She will be out there at the Norris Conference Center. So look up Debbie Diller in her website. She has a registration on there. She's going to have a 2-day workshop, which is setting up your classroom for success in pre-K to 5th grade. That's going to be on Friday, July 13th. And she's going to do establishing literacy and math stations for success in pre-K to 5th grade on Saturday, July 14th. I can't encourage you enough to, if this is something you are really interested in, differentiating, station-based instruction, looking at your learning environments, this is definitely the institute you probably want to go look into, just so you can get some ideas and thoughts from a lot of the things we discussed today. And again, I will set up the link for Deborah to give that to the schools in case anyone is interested. And again, I don't work for Debbie Diller, but I just know that a lot of her wonderful expertise is going to be really well blended in this institute. Again, I'm Benita Gonzalez. If you have any further questions, my phone number is at the bottom, 713-391-2630, or you may email me, bgonzalez@archdh.org. And again, I'm here for any questions. You may also go through Deborah Cohen from the Jewish Federation to see if there's any other pieces that you're interested in or any other topics that I can help you, as I'm honored to work with everyone, not only here in our diocese and the Jewish Federation, but all over the world to try and help students and teachers and educators really and truly not only learn from students, but learn all together. That is my whole key component. Wonderful. Thank you. And again, have a blessed day.